Chosen one, listen carefully. This message isn't an accident. God is preparing something you never saw coming. There are moments in life when a warning arrives at exactly the right time. Not necessarily because something dramatic is about to happen outside of you, but because something important is already happening inside of you. And sometimes the most dangerous thing we can do is ignore the message simply because we do not yet understand it. Think about how human beings respond to urgency. When we hear that something must be done before midnight, before a deadline, before an opportunity disappears, our attention changes. Suddenly, what we were postponing becomes important. The deadline forces us to confront something we have been avoiding. That is why the idea of 11:59 p.m. is so powerful. It represents the final moment before a transition. It reminds you that there are seasons in life when hesitation becomes a decision of its own. You may think you are waiting for more information, but sometimes you are actually waiting because you are afraid of what the truth will require you to do. There is a psychological principle behind this. The human mind naturally prefers familiarity over uncertainty. Even when the familiar situation is unhealthy, predictable pain can feel safer than unpredictable change. You can remain in the wrong relationship because at least you know what to expect. You can remain in an environment that diminishes you because leaving would force you to rebuild. You can continue believing a comfortable story because accepting the truth would require action. But eventually, reality demands an answer. And this is where faith becomes more than a comforting idea. Faith requires you to recognize that you do not need to know every detail of tomorrow before you obey what you understand today. Maybe the warning is not about a literal event happening before midnight. Maybe it is about something being revealed. Maybe it is about recognizing a pattern you have repeatedly ignored. Maybe it is about realizing that someone's behavior has been telling you something their words never admitted. Maybe it is about understanding that the season you have been praying to escape has already begun to end. The important question is not, who is going to be arrested? The deeper question is, what am I finally ready to stop allowing? Because sometimes the greatest arrest in your life is not a person being taken away in handcuffs. It is fear losing its authority over you. It is deception losing its influence. It is an unhealthy attachment losing its grip. It is the old version of yourself finally being unable to control the person you are becoming. And when that happens, everything can feel shaken. But being shaken is not the same as being destroyed. There is a difference between disruption and devastation. Disruption challenges the structure you built. Devastation convinces you that you cannot rebuild. Faith gives you the ability to distinguish between the two. You may be standing at a moment right now where something you once depended upon no longer feels stable. Perhaps a relationship is changing. Perhaps a truth is becoming impossible to ignore. Perhaps an opportunity is closing. Perhaps something you thought would remain permanent is suddenly being questioned. Do not immediately assume that the shaking means God has abandoned you. Sometimes the shaking is what reveals what was never strong enough to carry your future. And that is why you should pay attention when your inner life begins demanding honesty. Stop asking only, what is happening to me? Start asking, what is this moment trying to teach me? Because the person who learns from a warning does not need to be destroyed by the consequence. You do not have to wait until everything collapses to change direction. You can make the decision now. You can forgive now. You can walk away now. You can tell the truth now. You can stop chasing what continually diminishes you now. The clock is moving whether you act or not. So before 11:59 p.m., before this day becomes yesterday, make one decision that your future self will thank you for. Do not wait for life to force you to change. Change while you still have the choice. And once you understand that a warning is often less about predicting an event and more about preparing your mind to recognize truth, you begin to see another principle operating beneath the surface of life. What is hidden cannot remain hidden forever. Human beings are remarkably skilled at concealment. We hide motives behind polite words. We hide insecurity behind confidence. We hide manipulation behind concern. We hide resentment behind silence. Sometimes we even hide the truth from ourselves because accepting it would force us to make decisions we are not prepared to make. But concealment does not eliminate reality. It only delays confrontation with reality. Psychologically, this is one of the reasons unresolved situations create so much internal tension. When what we know and what we pretend not to know become two different things, the mind has to constantly manage the contradiction. You may tell yourself everything is fine, while another part of you recognizes that something is deeply wrong. You may accept someone's explanation, yet repeatedly notice behavior that contradicts their words. Eventually, patterns become louder than promises, and that is where discernment becomes essential. Discernment is not paranoia. It is not assuming the worst about everyone. It is the ability to observe without allowing emotion to distort what you are seeing. It means asking difficult questions. What consistently happens? What changes when nobody is watching? Do someone's actions support their words? Does their presence produce peace, wisdom, and growth, or confusion, fear, and instability? Be manufactured. A lie often requires maintenance. It needs additional explanations, additional excuses, additional stories to protect the original story. Truth, on the other hand, can stand without constant reinforcement. That is why exposure can feel so dramatic. The truth itself may not have suddenly appeared. You may simply have reached the point where you can no longer deny what has been visible for a long time. And spiritually, this principle carries even greater weight. Faith teaches us that hidden things are not ultimately hidden from God. Human beings may misunderstand you. People may judge you based on incomplete information. Someone may misrepresent your intentions. Someone may attempt to control the narrative surrounding your life. But you do not have to spend your entire existence proving yourself to everyone. There comes a point when you have to trust that truth has its own timetable. That does not mean you become passive. It means you stop exhausting yourself trying to expose every person who has misunderstood you. You stop obsessively monitoring what others are saying. You stop believing that your peace depends on controlling another person's opinion. Instead, you become committed to living in such a way that your character can withstand examination. And this is where the metaphor of an arrest becomes powerful. An arrest represents interruption. Something that was moving freely is suddenly stopped and confronted by authority. In your own life, there may be patterns that need to be interrupted: deception, fear, bitterness, addiction to approval, unhealthy relationships, or the habit of repeatedly betraying your own values. Perhaps the thing that needs to be stopped is not another person. Perhaps it is a pattern within you. That realization can be uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. Because once you identify what has been controlling you, you can begin to reclaim your freedom. Think about how many years people can spend defending a situation simply because they have already invested so much into it. They say, "I've come this far," but time invested in something does not automatically make it worthy of continuation. Sometimes wisdom means admitting that what once served you no longer belongs in your future. And when the truth finally becomes visible, do not fear it simply because it changes your plans. Truth may disrupt your expectations, but deception will eventually destroy your foundation. So if something is being revealed in your life, resist the instinct to panic. Observe, pray, think, ask better questions. Let evidence speak louder than emotion. Let character speak louder than promises, because the revelation of truth is not always the end of your peace. Sometimes it is the beginning of it. And when the hidden finally becomes visible, you are given a choice: defend the illusion or build your future on what is real. Choose truth. It may shake your world, but it will not betray your future. And once you understand that truth can interrupt what has been controlling your life, you begin to recognize something even deeper. Not every arrest is about a person. Sometimes the thing that needs to be stopped is the influence that has quietly been controlling you. Think about that for a moment. What if the greatest prison in your life has no walls? What if it is a fear you have carried for years? What if it is the need for someone's approval? What if it is an attachment to a person who repeatedly gives you confusion instead of peace? What if it is the belief that you are not capable of becoming who you were created to become? These things rarely announce themselves as chains. They often look like habits, relationships, excuses, or even reasonable concerns. Fear says, "Be careful." But sometimes what it really means is, "Don't change." Doubt says, "Wait until you are ready." But sometimes you will never feel completely ready. And insecurity says, "What will people think?" But eventually you have to ask a more important question. What will happen to my life if I continue living according to everyone else's expectations? This is where personal transformation begins. You stop looking only at external circumstances and start examining the internal forces that determine how you respond to those circumstances. Because two people can experience the same crisis and walk away with completely different futures. One person becomes bitter, another becomes wiser, one becomes afraid, another becomes focused. One says, "This proves that life is against me." Another says, "This is revealing what I need to change." The event may be similar. The interpretation is different, and interpretation shapes behavior. That is why psychological freedom is so important. You cannot always control what happens around you, but you can develop greater control over what happens within you. Maybe someone has spent years making you feel small. Perhaps their criticism became your inner voice. Perhaps you started hearing their judgment even when they were not present. You began questioning your decisions before anyone else could question them. That is control. And sometimes the moment of liberation begins when you recognize that the voice in your head does not belong to you. You have to ask yourself, is this actually my belief, or is this something I learned from someone who did not understand my potential? That question can change everything. Faith adds another dimension to this transformation. When you believe your identity is ultimately grounded in something greater than human approval, other people's opinions begin to lose their authority. You can respect people without surrendering your identity to them. You can love someone without allowing them to destroy your boundaries. You can forgive someone without giving them unlimited access to your life. You can release someone without hating them. And you can move forward without needing them to admit that they were wrong. That is freedom. Sometimes we think closure means getting an apology. We think healing means receiving an explanation. We think justice means watching the other person experience exactly what they caused. But real freedom begins when your future no longer depends on their behavior. That is the moment the old control is broken. And perhaps that is the arrest you need to understand in this message. Something that once moved freely through your mind is finally being stopped. A destructive thought pattern, a cycle of self-sabotage, a relationship built on manipulation, a fear that has dictated your decisions for too long. You are not required to carry every influence that once had access to you. There comes a moment when you have to say, "This ends with me." Not tomorrow, not when everyone understands, not when the circumstances become perfect. Now. Because every day you delay confronting what controls you, you give that influence another day of authority. But the moment you recognize it, challenge it, and choose differently, the balance begins to change. And this is where transformation becomes practical. Do not simply ask what you want to remove from your life. Ask what you are going to replace it with. Replace fear with disciplined action. Replace obsession with perspective. Replace approval seeking with self-respect. Replace confusion with honest observation. Replace resentment with purposeful movement. You do not become free merely by identifying the chain. You become free when you stop allowing the chain to determine where you go. Your breakthrough begins when what once controlled you no longer commands you. And once you begin breaking free from the forces that have controlled you, you discover another truth. Freedom does not mean that life suddenly becomes calm. Sometimes, the moment you stop tolerating what was unhealthy is the moment everything around you appears to become more chaotic. That is why you need to learn how to stay grounded when everything shakes. Because when circumstances change suddenly, your first instinct may be to react. The mind wants immediate answers. It wants to know who is responsible, what happens next, and how everything will turn out. But uncertainty activates fear, and fear has a way of shrinking your thinking. When people are afraid, they often make decisions designed to relieve discomfort rather than create a better future. They send the message they should have waited to send. They confront someone without understanding the situation. They make accusations without evidence. They abandon a good opportunity because it suddenly feels uncomfortable. They return to an unhealthy environment simply because uncertainty feels worse than familiar pain. That is why emotional stability is not weakness. It is power. When everything around you becomes uncertain, your ability to remain mentally clear becomes one of your greatest advantages. Think about a ship in a storm. The captain cannot control the ocean. The waves may rise, the wind may become violent, visibility may disappear. But the captain's responsibility is not to command the storm. The responsibility is to maintain direction. Your life works the same way. You cannot control every person's decision. You cannot control every rumor. You cannot control every unexpected event. You cannot guarantee that people will behave fairly or that circumstances will unfold according to your preferred timeline. But you can control your response, and that distinction changes everything. Faith does not promise that you will never experience storms. Faith gives you an anchor while you are inside them. There is an enormous difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is immediate and emotional. Response creates space between what happens and what you choose to do about it. That space is where wisdom lives. So when something shakes your world, pause. Do not immediately assume that the worst explanation is the correct explanation. Do not turn uncertainty into certainty simply because your mind is uncomfortable with not knowing. Do not allow one unexpected event to rewrite your entire understanding of your life. Gather facts. Observe patterns. Pray. Think. Then act. This is especially important when emotions are intense. Anger can make revenge feel like justice. Fear can make avoidance feel like wisdom. Loneliness can make returning to the wrong person feel like love. Your emotions are real, but they are not always reliable decision makers. You can acknowledge an emotion without obeying it. You can say, "I am afraid," without allowing fear to determine your next move. You can say, "I am angry," without becoming destructive. You can say, "I am hurt," without allowing pain to define your identity. That is emotional maturity. And when you develop that maturity, unexpected disruption begins to look different. Instead of asking, "Why is everything falling apart?" you begin asking, "What is this moment revealing?" Maybe it is revealing where you placed too much trust. Maybe it is revealing a weakness in your boundaries. Maybe it is revealing an assumption that needed to be challenged. Maybe it is revealing that you have outgrown a situation you once believed you needed. The shaking itself may not be the message. What becomes visible because of the shaking may be the message. And this is where preparation matters. You do not build emotional strength during the storm alone. You build it before the storm arrives. Develop habits that stabilize you. Protect your attention. Think before speaking. Keep promises to yourself. Spend time in prayer and reflection. Surround yourself with people who encourage wisdom rather than panic. Because when the unexpected happens, you will fall back on what you have practiced. If you have practiced fear, you will react from fear. If you have practiced discipline, you will respond with discipline. If you have practiced faith, you will remember that one moment of uncertainty does not define the entire story. So if tonight feels uncertain, do not surrender your peace to what you cannot control. Stand still long enough to see clearly. The world may shake around you, but you do not have to shake with it. When everything becomes unstable, become the most stable person in the room. And once you learn how to remain grounded when everything around you is uncertain, you begin to recognize another powerful possibility. A crisis can reveal what comfort was hiding. We often assume that disruption is purely negative. When something unexpected happens, our first question is, how do I make this stop? But sometimes the better question is, what is this showing me that I could not see before? Because comfort can create illusions. When everything is working, you may never examine the foundation beneath it. You may assume a relationship is strong because there has never been a serious test. You may believe you are confident because nobody has challenged you. You may think you're emotionally healthy because life has been predictable. Then something changes, and suddenly, what was hidden becomes visible. A crisis does not always create weakness. Sometimes it exposes weakness that was already there. That distinction matters. If a structure collapses under pressure, the pressure did not necessarily create the structural problem. It revealed it. The same principle applies to human character. Watch how people behave when they are disappointed. Watch how they speak when they are angry. Watch how they treat someone who can no longer benefit them. Watch what happens when they are given power, when they lose control, or when nobody is watching. Those moments can tell you more about a person than years of carefully chosen words. And this is why difficult seasons can become spiritually significant. They force us to separate appearance from substance. You may discover that someone you trusted was not who you believed they were. You may discover that an opportunity you desperately wanted was not actually good for you. You may discover that a goal you spent years chasing was based more on approval than purpose. You may even discover something about yourself that you were not ready to admit. That can hurt. But painful truth can still be liberating truth. There is a temptation, especially during difficult circumstances, to interpret every disruption as punishment. But not every closed door is punishment. Not every disappointment is rejection. Not every ending means you have failed. Sometimes an ending is an invitation to stop investing your life in something that cannot carry you forward. Faith allows you to consider that possibility without pretending the pain does not exist. You can grieve what ended and still believe something better may emerge. You can acknowledge that something mattered to you without insisting that it must remain forever. You can say, "I did not want this," while still asking, "What can I learn from this?" That question is powerful because it moves you from helplessness to responsibility. You stop asking only who is to blame and start asking what your next wise decision should be. And perhaps that is one of the greatest differences between people who are broken by crisis and people who are transformed by it. The transformed person does not waste the pain. They study it, they examine it, they learn from it, they allow it to refine their judgment. Think about a person who repeatedly ignores warning signs in relationships. Eventually, they may experience another painful ending. They could say, "Everyone always hurts me." Or they could ask, "Why do I keep choosing the same pattern?" That second question is uncomfortable, but it contains power. Because once you identify the pattern, you can interrupt it. The same applies to finances, friendships, work, habits, and personal decisions. If the same type of problem keeps appearing, perhaps the lesson is not simply about what other people are doing. Perhaps it is also about what you repeatedly permit, pursue, or overlook. That is not about blaming yourself. It is about reclaiming your agency. And when you reclaim agency, crisis becomes information. The event becomes a teacher. The disappointment becomes data. The exposure becomes clarity. You begin to understand that not everything that shakes your life is sent to destroy you. Some things shake your life because your foundation needs examination, and sometimes God allows you to see clearly what you previously could only see through hope. So do not run from every uncomfortable revelation. Some revelations are protection. Some endings are redirection. Some disruptions are preparation. And some moments that feel like the collapse of your world are actually the collapse of an illusion that could never support your future. When the storm exposes the truth, do not rebuild the illusion. Build on what is real.